Welcome to the Crystal Library, a pocket-sized portal into the magical, mysterious, and sometimes misunderstood world of crystals. I'm your host, Ashley, and each week I'll guide you as we explore one enchanting stone, its history, lore, healing properties, and one easy way to invite its magic into your everyday life. Whether you're crystal curious or deep in the woo, this is your space to learn, explore, and expand your connection to the mineral realm, one glittering gem at a time. So let's open the library and see which crystal wants to speak today. Hello, and welcome back to Big Crystal Energy, the Crystal Library. I am Ashley, and thank you so much for joining me. Today, we are closing out the crystal segment of our Victorian Spiritualism series with a stone that quite literally contains a ghost, and that is Phantom Quartz. And I feel like I could not have chosen a more perfect stone for this episode, truly. And then Friday of this week will be our final full episode on Victorian Spiritualism. So I am recording this episode way in advance because of my travels to Asia in March. So I'm still ironing out the details of the final episode of our Victorian Spiritualism series. So I can't really tease that here because I'm still trying to figure it out. But by the time this episode airs, the episode will be ready to roll. So during the Victorian era, there was this deep obsession with capturing proof of the unseen, right? They were using seances. Spirit photography was really big. People were using ectoplasm, and, you know, it was like drifting through the parlors. It's like a whole visual, right? There was this longing to prove that something survives, that what we cannot see still exists. And I feel like we're still doing that today, right? People are still doing ghost hunting and paranormal investigation. And so these concepts really started back then, but they persist even now. So what I think is that Phantom Quartz feels like nature's version of spirit photography. Okay. It is a crystal that remembers who it used to be. Inside of the stone, you'll see a faint kind of ghost-like shape, a smaller crystal suspended within the larger one, and they call that a phantom, a preserved echo of an earlier stage of growth. So the growth is paused, time passed, and then the crystal continued. Today, we're going to talk about what that means spiritually, psychologically, magically, and why Phantom Quartz might be one of the most profound stones to work with if you are navigating shadow work, karmic healing, soul groups, or simply trying to understand the layered versions of yourself, which I think most of us are if we're on this crystal journey. So let's step through the veil. What is Phantom Quartz exactly? So, as I mentioned previously, it's a quartz crystal with a visible internal ghost or phantom formation. It's caused by a pause in growth lasting potentially thousands of years, which is so interesting. And then the growth resumes, preserving the earlier shape inside. And sometimes the phantom or the ghost can contain different minerals, such as amethyst, chlorite, kind of a smoky mineral. Okay, so it's found worldwide, and it's actually relatively accessible. So if you were interested in getting some Phantom Quartz, it's not one of those stones that is really difficult to acquire, which I love. And what I love to think about it is that it's a crystal that survived interruption, right? So the crystal's growing, and then it pauses for thousands of years, and then it starts growing again. And then there's this like inclusions that happen within the crystal. And I think that is just fascinating. And why does the quartz stop growing? Well, sometimes it could be due to environmental changes such as temperature shifts or mineral shifts. And then it begins again. The earlier formation becomes permanently preserved inside. Okay. So this is how it works. Like, let me explain this maybe a little bit easier. So you have the crystal, it's growing, growing, growing. Then it stops for several different reasons. And then the crystal continues to grow around it. But that original shape and structure of the original crystal it remains, and then everything else grows around it. So maybe you have amethyst that grows around it, or you have chlorite or something that grows around it. Does that make sense? I hope so. I hope I'm explaining this right. I could be explaining this wrong. I'm sorry. I think I'm explaining it right, but sometimes I don't. Anyhow, there's a lot of spiritual and energetic properties of this type of stone. For growth and development, it really supports your overall physical and energetic growth. It's very helpful for exploring your developmental roots, like the roots of you. So it's really highly used with inner child work. It illuminates these patterns that are formed in our childhood. It's very good for subconscious exploration and also for creating healthy boundaries. So some of the things that you could consider when you're working with this stone: where did my growth pause, right? So were you on a growth journey and then all of a sudden something disrupted you and then you felt like your growth just paused and you just kind of stayed stagnant? What parts of you feel like they need love? Is it that inner child? Is it that child version of you that still feels like they're desperate for love and attention? And what lesson did I survive but never fully integrate into my life? That could be something like, was there something that you survived through some turmoil, but then you never really took that lesson and made it applicable to your life? Like you learned something, but then it never really caused a shift for you. And as I mentioned before, it's very useful for shadow and inner child work. So it facilitates the shadow work. I'm a big shadow work person. So potentially, if I was going to sit down and do some shadow work, I have some different shadow work journals that I like to use. Maybe I would have some Phantom Quartz with me while I'm doing that journaling, or I'm maybe talking to my therapist or something and diving deeper into these concepts. It encourages you to integrate the lessons of your life rather than reject them, because sometimes we go through these hardships and we go through these traumas or whatnot, and we just want to forget about it. We just want to push it out. But the Phantom Quartz reminds us that there's always a lesson to be learned, and there's always some way that we can integrate those lessons into our lives and try to integrate them in a more positive way. The stone helps you see the earlier version of yourself that is still living within you. And we all experience that. We all deal with that. And I think that we can potentially use that in a very cool and interesting way. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, right now, sitting here doing this podcast, the younger version of me who had so much interest in these topics would be so proud of the me of today who had to overcome different devastations and traumas and things to become the person I am today, that now feels comfortable sharing these topics and chatting about these things and learning about crystals and sharing my love of witchy things with all of y'all. So I think that's another way that you can think about the stone. There's one thing that you could maybe kind of say as a mantra to yourself: that you did not break, you became layered, right? So those things that happened to you, they did not break you. They're just a layer to you in your life and what you're now doing. I do want to briefly touch on reincarnation and soul groups, just because when I was doing the research for this episode, those concepts kept coming up. And while I personally have done some time studying these concepts, maybe they're new to you, or maybe you've heard reincarnation, but you don't really know what it means, or maybe you just kind of like know a very high level of what it means, and maybe you've never heard the word soul group before. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time diving into this, but I just kind of want to give you a high level overview of what these concepts are, and then explain how what that has to do with this particular stone. So Phantom Quartz, especially smoky and amethyst varieties, are often connected to reincarnation and soul groups, and I want to kind of gently explain those concepts so everyone can follow along. Reincarnation is the idea that the soul does not live one lifetime, but instead it incarnates, meaning it takes on a physical body multiple times, each life offering different lessons and experiences. Okay, so most people kind of understand that. You don't have to believe this literally. You can just hold this concept kind of symbolically if you don't believe in the idea of reincarnation. But many spiritual traditions, including Theosophy, which heavily influenced Victorian Spiritualism, viewed the soul as eternal. The body changes, the essence continues. Now, a soul group is the idea that we don't incarnate randomly or alone. There may be a cluster of souls who repeatedly enter lifetimes together, sometimes as family, sometimes as lovers, sometimes as rivals. The purpose isn't comfort, the purpose is evolution. Smoky Phantom Quartz is said to take you back to a time before you left your soul group, before birth, reconnecting you to that shared intention. And even if reincarnation doesn't resonate with you, the metaphor still works. We are constantly reincarnating through versions of ourselves. Phantom Quartz becomes a symbol of remembering. Now, there are many psychic and magical uses of this particular stone, and it is often used as a gateway for meditation. It's used for past life recall or working with your Akashic Records. So when you're working with the Akashic Records, you're looking back on past lifetimes. And if you are interested in learning more about the Akashic Records, I did a podcast with Alexa Darren, who reads Akashic Records, last year for the Big Crystal Energy podcast. And I should link that podcast in the show notes, just so that if you want to know more about Akashic Records, you could check out that episode, because it is a ways back, unless you don't mind scrolling back. I do have I don't even know what I'm up to now, 120 episodes or something crazy, which is absolutely wild to me. But also, the Phantom Quartz is used for psychic dreams, astral travel, which is always a very interesting topic to me. It's used for clairaudience, which is subtle, like hearing subtle guidance. They use it for ghost investigations, connecting with recently deceased loved ones. Each phantom is said to contain an angel or a fairy. I did read that in one of the texts that I was researching from, which I thought was so fun. I was like, oh, each phantom contains an angel or a fairy. Why do I not have more Phantom Quartz? But Victorians, they tried to photograph ghosts through their spirit photography. And then we have Phantom Quartz, which is kind of like a ghost, but instead of summoning spirits outwardly, the stone invites inward remembrance. Okay, that's the difference. So I also wanted to offer just like a simple practice that you could do as a listener. I created it called the growth pause ritual. And number one, you can just sit with your Phantom Quartz. You might want to light a candle. It kind of will give you that Victorian seance vibes, which I love, of course. Hold the stone to your heart and you can ask, where did my growth pause? What version of me is preserved inside? And then you can just sit there and kind of visualize the inner phantom glowing and see your present self kind of growing around it. And then you might want to just sit and journal a little bit on these questions. What lessons have I already survived? What part of me still needs integration? And where am I still becoming? And if you'd like, one optional thing you could do would be write a letter to your phantom self, sort of like a Victorian morning letter. But instead of grieving, you honor that version, that outgrown version of yourself. Phantom Quartz doesn't ask you to summon spirits. It asks you to remember yourself. It reminds us that growth is not linear, that pauses do not equal failure, that life, even when life interrupts us through grief, trauma, illness, confusion, growth can resume. We are not stuck. And when it does, the earlier versions of us are not erased. They are preserved. Victorian Spiritualism was about speaking to the dead. Phantom Quartz is about speaking to parts of yourself that never died. The inner child, the soul blueprint, the version of you that existed before fear. You're not broken. You are not broken places. You are layered evolution. And thank you for walking through the veil with me during this series. I cannot think of a more poetic crystal to close this portion of the series. And as always, everything you need is already inside of you. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you for visiting the Crystal Library. I hope today's stone offered just the magic you needed. If you loved this episode, share it with your favorite mystic and tag me on Instagram at mystical.mama.ash or at Bid Crystal Energy Podcast. And if you're feeling generous, leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps this magic reach more curious souls. Until next time, keep your crystals close and your intuition closer.